The Night Fae inhabit the lush and verdant lands of Ardenweald, who are responsible with continuing the system of rebirth, which keeps the entire system of life and death ticking. Whether you are looking forward to playing as these nature lovers, who seem to have an affinity for Irish mythology, or are disgusted at Blizzard's continued imposition of the vile furry agenda, haunting all corners of the internet, hopefully by the end of this video, you will have a better understanding of the real-world history which has inspired them. In particular, we are going to look into pre-Christian Irish religion, and how it inspires the deceptively upbeat Night Fae. Hello everybody. People seem to really like the last video I did about the philosophical basis of anima, so I decided to give myself a bit of a personal challenge and do something similar for each of the 4 covenants before the release of Shadowlands. No particular order to them. We were just starting with the Night Fae because I had a fun idea for the thumbnail and I had some thoughts about what to talk about. In the comments, please let me know if you find the sections about WoW or about real-world history more enjoyable / educational. I find myself more comfortable with the history, but I think it might be taking up too much of the videos. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start today with talking about early Irish religion. I'll begin by saying that I haven't done any specific reading upon this subject, but I've pieced together information from several readings that I've done over the years. That said, the major sources I'm operating off of are going to be How the Irish Saved Civilization by Thomas Cahill, for specific information and archaeological discussion, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, for his explanation of pagan grimness, and The City of God by Augustine, for his writings on contemporary paganism and Varro's trichotomy of religious practice. Irish paganism was incredibly different from the cutesy manner in which stories about fairies are often conveyed today. Writing of the relationship between the Irish and their gods, Cahill is quick to emphasize a strong atmosphere of arbitrariness to the world which deeply concerted not only Christian travelers, but also the Irish themselves. Irish epics further insist upon the capricious nature of the gods, with blessings often coming with strings attached. In particular, the Morrigan was feared even by victors of battle, because it was believed that she often transformed those she assisted. This created an attitude of intense reluctance to interact with the supernatural world, with St. Patrick's biographers almost unanimously recalling that most Irish warriors found it strange that Patrick slept peacefully after interacting with Druids. Speaking of Druids, the capricious nature of Irish divinity produced a strong social barrier between their priests and society writ large. Sure, they served a valuable purpose, but they existed almost as a society in parallel. This separation is also borne out by archaeological research, with repeated digs finding almost conclusive evidence that human sacrifice was, if not as common as in Carthage or Mesoamerica, certainly widespread. Both Cahill and Patrick's biographers strongly suspect that it was this fearful attitude towards their gods that caused Christianity to so completely overtake Ireland. In fact, less than 1 generation after Patrick's death, Irish paganism would survive only insofar as it managed to syncretize into lay practice through the occasional minor feast day, saint, or fairy tale. Before I move on to talk about the philosophical legacy of Irish myth and paganism, I would like to briefly reflect on 2 things that I think are pretty crucial to understanding what we know about Irish religion. First, no real sources exist that were not transcribed by Christian monks. This is not to suggest foul play on their parts. I have yet to read any reputable scholar that would argue that they're intentionally misleading or misremembering, but rather I would simply point to the example of how Norse myth is viewed. The myth of Ragnarok, which is the cornerstone of the Norse system, is regarded by most scholars as a misunderstanding on the part of Christian monks, who are in the absence of direct access to Norse priests, reading their own system too far into things. For example, it is likely that Valhalla and Hell are almost complete misreadings, with many proposing that instead the Norse believed in a system not too far from reincarnation as imagined by the Hindus. It is not impossible that a newly founded Irish monastery, filled with bright-eyed and literate converts, eagerly exploring authors such as Irenaeus or Athanasius, would understand their previous religion through the lens of these more Greco-Roman authors. The second idea, which is that of Varro's trichotomy. Varro, arguably the first Roman philosopher of religion, proposed that there were three ways of interacting with religion: the fabulous, the civil, and the natural. The fabulous refers to myths and stories. The civil refers to the temple with its tithes and rituals. And the natural is the philosopher's religion. To parse, the story of Hercules is fabulous, the Olympic Games were civil, and Platonism is natural. In the context of Irish religion, we have lots of records of the fabulous, but very little understanding of the civil and almost complete lack of knowledge regarding the natural. In short, we know what the car's paint job was, we have a vague idea of what the interior is like, but we know nothing about the engine itself. And no religion lacks any of these elements. This is just something to bear in mind in how we remember Irish paganism. If Irish paganism has any substantial influence on popular culture, it comes from the poets of the 19th century. As a reaction to the increasing stuffiness and solemn tone of English society, many poets and artists found happy inspiration in the colorful stories of Irish and Celtic myth. It is these people who put fairies and the like back on the map, and often interpreted the capriciousness in a sort of childlike innocence. It is easy to see this childish and upbeat Epicureanism in the Night Fae, but I'll get into that in a little bit. To many authors, however, this carefree attitude hides a genuine cruelty waiting just below the surface. Writing on the subject, C.S. Lewis proposed the idea of pagan grimness. That is, that philosophical traditions often appear from the outside as opposites to their real beliefs because of how these beliefs become internalized. For example, Lewis, in his analysis of fairy tales, argues that despite their bright veneer, they often conveyed a worldview that is highly pessimistic, whereas the type of Aesop that they existed as a reaction to was fundamentally an optimistic narrative, although it had a veneer of seriousness. I would argue that Stoicism is also a victim of this confusion, with many authors typecast as dour or depressed, who, upon reading, are incredibly optimistic and joyful, which I'd like to talk a little bit more about when we get to the Bastion video. With regards to the Night Fae, though, I would argue that this sentiment holds true, and that despite upbeat acting in a zone filled with euphemism, their understanding of the world is often much more negative than the other covenants. Now let's talk about the Night Fae themselves. Obviously, Ardenweald is very inspired by that sort of Celtic aesthetic that we see in Druids as well, and the Fae and Night Fae comes very clearly from Irish myth. The position of the Winter Queen as a giveth-taketh-away leader is also very reminiscent of the relationship between the Irish and their gods. Rather than the Winter Queen serving her covenant directly, she has a higher obligation towards the Shadowlands itself, which is in this sense a non-anthrocentric understanding of the world. I would also argue that the position that the Night Fae find themselves in, where they must choose which groves survive and which perish through sacrificing their own, is incredibly reminiscent of the notion of pagan grimness. Although extremely upbeat in tone, for example, they throw a play as part of the intro quest and the zone is full of sexual euphemism, the philosophy of the zone is very grim. The community has spent a lot of time talking about the Kyrian and how sort of solemnly devoted to duty they are in a way that's kind of crazy. But I would argue that on a deeper level, many aspects of the Covenant are actually quite optimistic with regards to human nature and its ability for improvement. The Night Fae, by comparison, are probably the most grim and pragmatic of all the factions. Rest in peace, Bear God. Nature is fundamentally capricious from an ethical perspective, and as a final note, I'll leave you with a paraphrasing of C.S. Lewis on the subject. It is easy to forget, in an era of personal religion and industrial domination, that when the ancients spoke powerfully of Poseidon and Demeter, they did not say so romantically, but with fear and terror. Overall, I'm super hyped to play through the Night Fae campaign, and potentially even playing Farmville. Blizzard has been talking about wanting to do more ethically gray storylines for a long time, so I'm glad that they've realized that nature is probably the most ethically gray subject imaginable. I've always been confused why druids get portrayed as so kind and cuddly, As I talked about, they were very feared by the communities they were very feared by the communities they resided in, but also very respected. Please leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. I get oddly encouraged by the endorphin rush that creates. Have a good day, y'all, and God bless. Oh, also, there might be some weird clicking in the video. I can't get rid of that noise with the headset I have now because I lost the connection cord for my Yeti, which should be coming soon.